Okay, guys, this is my first convention that I've been to. And last night was the very first night of the Democratic National Convention. And I managed to get on the convention floor with producer Laura Benshaw. Hey, testing, 1, 2, 3. We're at the DNC. And I gotta say, the energy was pretty high, especially when the headliner of the evening, President Biden, took the stage. Right now, all the delegates are taking to their feet. They're standing. It's late, but the euphoria in this room is real. It's palpable. But I will say I'm pretty tired this morning. How are you guys fueling yourselves today and staying awake?
Lots of coffee.
Deep dish pizza. No, I'm kidding. I don't. Deep dish is an abomination and nobody should ever eat it.
Welcome to a hybrid episode of the Campaign Moment and Post Reports. We're coming to you from the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. It's Tuesday, August 20th. I'm Elahe Izadi, co-host of Post Reports.
And I'm Aaron Blake, senior political reporter and author of the Campaign Moment newsletter. We're also joined this week by White House reporter Matt Viser, who's back on the show. Hey, Matt.
Hey.
You guys, I want to start with talking about President Biden's speech last night. This was not the speech we were expecting him to give, or he was even expecting to give a few months ago. But as we all know, he dropped out. Vice President Kamala Harris is the new nominee. Matt, this must have been such a strange moment for Biden and also unprecedented for the Democratic Party. What did he need to do with this speech, and what were you watching out for?
I mean, I was curious if he could keep his emotions in check. You know, I mean, he is at a moment reflecting on a half-century career in politics. So how does this moment hit him? It's been a bumpy few weeks, and he's made some tough decisions. So I think we saw that when he first came out on the stage and was tearful, at the start of his speech.
Thank you. I love you.
It was also curious how the party would receive him. And I think we saw from nearly 5 minutes of a sort of standing ovation and applause. And I think there was a feeling that he's like, that they are thanking him for his career.
Yeah, that's interesting because, as I said, I was on the floor of the convention center last night. I saw staff pass around all these We Heart Joe signs with impressive speed and choreography, I must admit.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Joe.
So, Matt, what do you make of all this love, whether it was orchestrated or not, being shown to Biden? Like, why was that such a production? What was the importance of that?
I think there's a couple things. I mean, I do think that there is genuine affection for Joe Biden, who's been sort of a party figure for most of everybody in that room's life. Most people remember the party and they remember Joe Biden in these different moments. So I do think that there is an affection and sort of a parting farewell to him. And there's also an undercurrent where it's thank you, Joe Biden, not only for your career, but thank you for not running again. And so there's that feeling of like, thank you for the decision that you made to drop out of the race. And that, I think, is like creating a lot of conflicting emotions for people at this moment.
Yeah, I think it's important to separate those two issues. Republicans will talk about this as the Democrats, shoving aside Biden because he wasn't up to the job and they didn't like him. This was really a pragmatic decision for Democrats to usher him aside and to try and get a different candidate in. And also, it's not because they dislike Joe Biden. Like, this was about whether he could win. And there is a lot of goodwill in the party towards him. They believe his presidency has been a successful one. They just didn't believe that was something that could be sold to voters at this point because there were these concerns about Biden's ability to campaign and kind of carry the torch forward.
And Aaron, I'm curious what you made of this speech, because for me, it felt like at a lot of moments a State of the Union speech, or he's talking about his administration's accomplishments, and talk about some of the substance of the speech and what you make of it.
Yeah, it was really interesting to me because this is kind of a speech in which the party was pulled in two directions. One was this effort to show gratitude to Joe Biden for his presidency, for stepping aside. And the other was this desire to move forward and not kind of be defined by this presidency that is pretty broadly unpopular. And so having Joe Biden speak at this convention at all, while necessary, doesn't necessarily feed the purposes of the party moving forward. So I thought it was really interesting that he made a decision to kind of give a standard issue campaign speech. Like a lot of this stuff would have been at home on the campaign trail 3 months ago, where he's talking about the accomplishments. But what he did is he talked about those things and then talked about how, oh, by the way, Kamala Harris was there too, and here's what she did on $35 a month insulin, things like that.
We finally beat Big Pharma. And guess who cast the tie-breaking vote? Vice President, soon-to-be President Kamala Harris.
Like
So-
tying his administration
we
and
did
his
these-
record to her.
Exactly. We did these successful things, and she was a part of that. So she owns some of my record, but look at the good parts of my record that she owns. Another example is when he was talking about standing up to Vladimir Putin.
Just as no commander-in-chief should ever bow down to a dictator, the way Trump bows down to Putin. I never have, and I promise you, Kamala Harris will never do it. Will never bow down.
Matt, also what's interesting is, you're talking about his emotions, but he was very forceful and energetic, actually.
Yeah.
This was not debate Joe Biden.
Yeah.
State of the Union, Joe
it was
Biden.
State of the Union. Yeah, that's right.
I stand before you now on this August night to report that democracy has prevailed. Democracy has delivered. And now democracy must be preserved.
And I think that's part of it, like him feeding off of a crowd and an energetic crowd that's supportive of him. And quite frankly, he did have a teleprompter. So, he was not like thinking so much on his feet, although the speech went much longer than I think had been planned, which is also typical of Joe Biden and why the evening lasted so long.
I like how the convention organizers blamed too much raucous applause for the program going an hour and a half longer than it was supposed to.
Interesting. Yeah, like Biden got like about 4 minutes, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, there was a lot of applause, but generally speaking, you should probably build that into your schedule.
Put Aaron on your planning committee next time.
I'm here to help.
Well, I want to talk about, obviously, Biden was the headliner, but there were some other speeches last night. Aaron, I know you wrote about New York Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She's progressive, and she's often been to the left of many Democrats and critical of the party. And she made, it seems like, one of the more impactful speeches of the night. Why did it stand out to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think if there's a speech that we're looking back on in a few years from this convention, at least Monday night's version of it, that's one that we could be talking about. Ocasio-Cortez has for years kind of been warming to the establishment side of the party after entering as a squad member and kind of Bernie Sanders acolyte. And I think last night really kind of cemented that transition. And I think more broadly, she really went after Trump as not being the friend to the working class and delivered a pretty strong indictment of him.
And Chicago, we have to help her win. Because we know that Donald Trump would sell this country for $1 if it meant lining his own pockets and greasing the palms of his Wall Street friends. And I, for one, am tired of hearing about how a two-bit union buster thinks of himself as more of a patriot than the woman who fights every single day to lift working people out from under the boots of greed, trampling on our way of life.
But I think it's kind of more broadly reflective of this kind of unifying moment in the Democratic Party. Like, Trump is the great unifier of Democrats, and she's become more pragmatic over time. And I think that the way she kind of delivered her speech really spoke to delegates last night.
Well, like I said, this is my first convention. I mean, when you talk about unifying message, how does that compare to past conventions where there were fissures?
Well, I think what's interesting is, as Aaron was talking, like, this is only possible in part because of Joe Biden's exit. Like, you can really start to think about who are the party up-and-comers, because Joe Biden's presence for so long has somewhat stalled that. Because he, is an elder statesman in the party, you've thought less about the kind of the bench. And last night there were some attempts at protests that were largely snuffed out. And I think that you're not seeing as visible of protests as there would be, particularly if Biden were still the nominee. This convention is so much different than it would have been had he still been in the race. I think the energy levels are different. I think the willingness to overlook some of the divisions are different at this moment than they were just a few weeks ago.
Yeah, I've been really surprised by how kind of little we've seen of the pro-Palestinian protests. There was a scene on Monday.
Like inside the convention center?
Both inside and outside. There was a march on Monday where some of the demonstrators broke off and kind of went into a no man's land that they weren't supposed to be in, and there was a confrontation with police. There was a banner that was unfurled on Monday night while Biden spoke. But as Matt was saying, it's not on the level that you might have seen if Biden, the more pro-Israel politician, was still here. There seems to be less kind of impetus for that movement to really make a show here in Chicago right now. We'll see how the rest of the week goes, but that was a major thing that was looming over this convention and something that we've been talking about for a few months.
Yeah. I was outside on Monday seeing some of these protests, and they are smaller, at least they were yesterday, than organizers had expected. And I am curious how it is going to play out throughout the rest of the week. And on the floor, one of the big moments that people stood up and applauded for when Biden spoke last night was his mentioning of Israel, Gaza.
Those protesters out in the street, they have a point. A lot of innocent people are being killed on both sides.
Matt, how has the president been grappling with the politics of this at this moment, given he's not running again?
I mean, he usually does not give a nod to the pro-Palestinian cause like he did last night.
Did that stand out to you?
Yeah. I mean, it was a different moment. I think he's also feeling confident that there's going to be some sort of deal, some sort of ceasefire. So I think you're seeing a lot of activity of him in a lame duck sort of period. But I think he feels like they're close to a deal, and he's close to being able to resolve what's been a major point of friction politically for him in this country. And so I think he has some new confidence in that, which maybe is leading to some of those lines in his speech. I mean, I think we'll see how the rest of the convention goes if protesters amplify their message in other ways.
And there's also some uncommitted delegates here, right? And talk a little bit about who they are and what they represent.
And I think there's a debate over whether some of those uncommitted delegates will speak or will have any sort of formal role in the convention as people who've sort of withhold their support for the nominee
over
sort
this
of a
issue.
Protest over this issue.
Yeah,
and of course those uncommitted delegates this was a protest vote against Biden during the primaries, where these pro-Palestinian groups urged people to vote for uncommitted since Biden didn't have significant primary opposition. And that allowed uncommitted to have a significant number of delegates here at the convention. And so it creates an interesting dynamic.
All right, let's actually take a quick break there, and we will be right back. Were there any other speeches or moments last night that were notable to you guys?
Well, one person we haven't talked about yet is Hillary Clinton, who was the nominee in 2016 and has spoken and attended many conventions before, and was a major speaker last night. And to me, what was interesting with Hillary Clinton's speech was sort of also mixed emotions, right?
On the other side of that glass ceiling is Kamala Harris raising her hand and taking the oath of office as our 47th President of the United States.
Like, she is seeing Kamala Harris potentially achieve the dream that she once had. And she's taking some pride in creating that pathway in becoming the first female nominee of a major party. But there's also an aspect of somebody else is achieving that. And so you could sort of see that in her speech a little bit, like with Joe Biden, sort of taking pride in helping create a pathway for Kamala Harris, but also some wistfulness about the fact that it's not them who's achieving this historic goal.
The future is here. It's in our grasp. Let's go win it.
Yeah. Oh, and oh my gosh, next to the Minnesota delegation, she was like treated like a rock star. I saw like people leaping to their feet. I mean, she was greeted with a lot of enthusiasm. I know this is basically a big pep rally, but still.
Yeah.
Two things for me. One is there was a real kind of personal touch in some of the messaging last night. So we had 3 women who had gone through arduous abortion experiences talking about Republican abortion bans in states and basically making the argument that, like, you know, the states can decide, but look at what the states are deciding to do. And then also, you know, 2 speakers, Minnesota Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan, Congressman Robert Garcia from California, talking about family members who had died from COVID and kind of the chaotic response that Trump led. And then the last thing that I think is interesting and worth noting is Sean Fain, the president of the United Auto Workers, giving a speech and taking his jacket off to reveal a shirt that said, "Trump is a scab, vote Harris." And then the crowd responded by chanting, "Trump's a scab." I thought this is kind of the birth of a new talking point because it escaped some people's notice last week. But when Trump did his event on X with Elon Musk, he kind of praised Elon Musk for supposedly firing striking workers, which runs counter to Trump's efforts to appeal to these labor unions, which has been a part of his 2024 campaign. And so I think you're probably going to see Democrats talk a lot about those comments moving forward. You know, we saw Hulk Hogan rip off his shirt at the Republican convention, and here was Sean Fain ripping off his
Sean
jacket.
Fain is the Hulk Hogan for Democrats.
He does not look like Hulk Hogan, but he looks very much like a union president.
Okay.
But I thought that was a moment that we're likely to hear more or similar things about in the future. Ocasio-Cortez also calling Trump a 2-bit union buster. Like, this is going to be a focus moving forward.
The other part was in terms of chanting, was the "lock him up" chant.
Yes, this
which
was really interesting.
Hillary Clinton seemed to take
It
some
happened
joy
during her speech.
That
they were saying lock him up.
Lock him up, which of course was the chant against her that he would lead his crowds in 2016. Now you have a Democratic crowd chanting the same thing at her one-time opponent in Donald Trump. So she's sort of smiling.
Yeah.
She kind of smirked and
Took
like
in
let
the
it
moment.
happen.
Yeah.
She wasn't exactly like, no,
Fighting
she
we
wasn't,
it,
can't
yeah.
do
She
this.
was like, I'm going to let these tables turn a little bit.
Yeah.
And by the way, it's worth emphasizing, Trump has been convicted of a crime now,
Mm-hmm.
whereas, you know, the things that the things the crowd was telling her to be locked up for were never proven or prosecuted.
I do think it is important to note that there are people here who are delegates. They were Joe Biden delegates, and they did not want him to drop out. But I didn't get the sense that there were any lingering resentments after he stepped aside when I interviewed some delegates. So here's Delegate Jessica Nichols. She's from Virginia, and she got emotional talking about when Biden exited the race and how she called her congressman to share her sadness.
So, and he answered the phone right away. He was at the Capitol, just got out of a meeting with Nancy Pelosi. He was like, "Jessica, what's going on?" He said, "I just want you to know that we love President Biden so much, and we've been hearing negative things, and it was just upsetting, you know." But when Vice President Harris came in, when they made the transition, it was an amazing thing that happened.
So even her, she's not conflicted about Harris. She's channeling that energy into supporting her. I'm curious if either of you have heard any unrest or lingering resentment among delegates, or if this sentiment from Jessica really mirrors where the party, even diehard Biden fans, are.
So in talking with people close to Joe Biden, family members, and people who support him for a long time, I think a lot of people have taken their cues from him. And I think seeing him in moments like last night, in moments like the Oval Office address after he dropped out, where he does seem at peace with his decision. He is, in fact, going out of his way in his speech to respond to people who say that he's angry.
And all this talk about how I'm angry at all those people who said I should step down. That's not true. I love my country more, and we need to preserve our democracy.
He is trying to kind of soothe that resentment within the party, and I think largely that's been effective. I think over time, there still is some bitterness, I think. It's just way below the surface at the moment. And so you're getting people like the delegate from Virginia sort of trying to grapple with that, where they feel conflicted about Joe Biden's exit from the stage, but also reconciling with that's probably the best option for the party, and seeing the results of Harris and the enthusiasm that she's brought to this campaign has changed the race completely. And they're sort of appreciative of him. And thank you, Joe Biden, for allowing this to be ushered in.
I thought it was really interesting that he nodded to this issue in his speech. Like, when you're in politics, there's a sense that if you acknowledge something, it becomes a bigger deal. And so when he says, I'm not angry, like...
It's like, are you?
but the idea that he's angry is like the thing that Trump is pushing. Like, there's not a whole lot of like...
Wait, say more about that.
I mean, Trump is like building up this idea that there was a coup in the Democratic Party and that, he's kind of fantasized about the idea that Biden is angry and he's going to come in the convention and take the nomination back, which of course isn't happening. That to me suggests that they do feel the need to take this head on. And there are some hard feelings that they want to signal to people like, no, we're moving on from this. This is not a big deal. I will add too that there were a lot of Biden diehards who, when the party was pushing him out, were very concerned about this and were fighting back very hard. But almost the moment after he dropped out, the party united. And it wasn't just kind of what we're seeing publicly. It also showed up in polling. There was a survey from Ipsos shortly afterwards that showed just 4% of Democrats were strongly opposed to Biden having dropped out. This was a couple days afterwards. So people might have good feelings for him, and they might even not really like what happened a whole lot, but they're moving forward, and there's not kind of this lingering anger that he spoke about that kind of looms over this convention.
Yeah.
He also spoke to reporters after, as he's boarding Air Force One to go on a vacation. And he reiterated that he has not spoken to Nancy Pelosi, but he reiterated he's not angry. And he said, this was my decision.
And so just so we're clear, the Nancy Pelosi of it all is that she was, one of the people who was
orchestrating the whole process to pressure him to drop out of the race. And so he's making clear this was not Nancy Pelosi's decision. This was my decision. He wasn't forced into it. But he's continuing to sort of reiterate that in questions from reporters after the speech. The other thing to me about the whole thing was it felt like a moment of catharsis for the whole party last night with Biden, where they felt like they could both applaud him and move on from him at the same time and get this sort of part out of the way and move on with the convention that's going to be about nominating Kamala Harris.
Yeah.
And it was just like a lot of emotion in that room.
There was like the handoff even.
Yeah. Well, and Kamala Harris, a couple of hours before Joe Biden took the stage, came in somewhat of a surprise appearance.
And I want to kick us off by celebrating our incredible president, Joe Biden.
And led the crowd in thanking Joe Biden.
Joe, thank you for your historic leadership, for your lifetime of service to our nation, and for all you will continue to do. We are forever grateful to you.
And it seemed to me like a moment where the transition had occurred, where the vice president is usually the understudy. You don't hear from that person very often, and they're sort of on the sidelines. But she is now the principal in a way, and it's her convention. It's her party now, and that transition seems to be occurring in real time.
All right. So, Aaron, was there any other point you wanted to raise about last night before we sign off?
I'm not sure it's shocking that night one would focus so heavily on Donald Trump, but it was a lot of Donald Trump. Like, they were playing videos of things that Trump said. They hit him on COVID, on abortion, on January 6th, on his, criminal conviction. I counted about 150 mentions of Trump over the course of the night.
And is that unusual for a convention?
I mean, if you looked at the Republican convention, there wasn't quite as much mention of Biden and Harris, I think. And it is a decision because right now there is somewhat of a choice between playing up your new nominee and focusing on who she is, which I'm sure they'll get to later in the week, and defining your opponent. And I think Democrats focused a lot more on defining their opponent than Republicans chose to, which is a really interesting choice, especially given Harris's ascendant in this race. Like, they could focus on kind of a positive message a lot more and not worry about the opposition. But on the other hand, despite her rising, Trump is still more popular than he was when he was president. So maybe they view this as like, we're rising, but we also want to make sure we bring him back down to where he was before and really solidify these gains that we've made in this race over the last few weeks.
Well, we'll have to leave it there. That's it for today's episode. Thank you, Matt, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Matt Beiser is a White House reporter for The Post, and Aaron Blake is a senior political reporter. Of course, thank you, Aaron.
Thank you, and don't forget to subscribe to the Campaign Moment newsletter.
You can find a link to the Campaign Moment newsletter in our show notes and at postreports.com.
And if you're tuning in via Post Reports and you don't already follow the Campaign Moment feed, now is, of course, a great time to do it. We're going to be dropping exclusive episodes during the Democratic National Convention this week, and we'll be bringing you those kinds of episodes every single week between now and Election Day.
Today's episode was produced by Laura Benshoff and mixed by Sean Carter. It was edited by Lucy Perkins and Mary Jo Murphy. Thanks also to Ariel Plotnick. I'm Elahe Izadi. Talk to you later, Aaron.
Talk to you soon.